12:59 now. So when we hit 1 o'clock.
Who am I talking to? Everybody? Hi, everybody.
I'm back, and you're going live. I'm putting you live now because there's a little bit of a delay. And so, Ralph, I'm making you the host.
Oh, but don't you want to make Jonathan the host?
No.
No, why not?
Because that's okay, because you're going to end it when it's over.
Oh, okay. So I'm the host, but Jonathan can.
Can I start speaking?
You'll start it off, yeah. Even though I'm the host.
Hold on. Ready? 1, 2, 3. You're live.
Hi, everybody. It's my delight this morning. I'm here with Ralph White, who is the co-founder of the New York Open Center, and a series of esoteric quests for the last 25 years. And I think probably one of the leading figures in the whole holistic movement in the last 50 years. Findhorn and Iceland and the New York Open Center for 36 years in New York City. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Ralph. And let's start, Ralph, talking about some of the history. 1984, you started at the Open Center with Walter Beebe. How did that come about? What was your impulse to do that?
Let's make a little preface to that. We may have some viewers here who are expecting to see Christopher Bamford. Our initial intention and some early announcements went out that I would be interviewing Chris Bamford, who is one of our most knowledgeable thinkers and writers about Rudolf Steiner and about the Western esoteric tradition. But Chris was not able to do it today, so I should just say for anybody who's here to see Chris Bamford, we plan and hope to do it on 2 weeks' time on Monday, the 15th of October. Christopher Bamford at 1 o'clock, the editorial director of Steiner Books, Rudolf Steiner Books, and really a wonderful writer and somebody who's spoken at many of the Esoteric Quests. Anyway, just wanted to say that in case anybody was here thinking that one of us was Chris Bamford. So yes, back to me. How did the whole thing start? Well, it was a fortuitous meeting between Walter Beebe and myself way back. We actually met really on Christmas Day. It was when we agreed to work together, the only Christmas Day I've ever done this. Christmas Day, 1982. Started working on the Open Center in the spring of 83, and we launched, we figured it would take us 9 months. We launched in January of 1984. So for me, I had been on a long, long journey. I had been on a kind of spiritual quest since I was 21 and had my own awakening in the southwestern deserts of New Mexico and Arizona when I first came to the States. I was born in Wales and spent my teenage years in the north of England, was educated in England, but came to the States as a graduate student, took a trip down Route 66 that first Christmas, and it changed my life permanently. So I'd been on an inner quest for a long time. It's actually described in my book. I wrote a memoir called The Jeweled Highway, which you can find on Amazon. And
it's on my bookshelf.
There it is. You can get, yeah. Yes, and there's more about it on my website at ralphwhite.net. But essentially, yes, I had been, after a long travels, journeys, South America, and all kinds of things. I did come to the Findhorn community in northeast Scotland in the mid to late 70s, spent 3.5 years there, experiencing what it was really like to live in a spiritually awake community without any particular teacher or teaching, just more nature, our love of nature. I went on from there to, I was program director of Omega Institute and ran the first few summers up there in Rhinebeck, when Rhinebeck, I will never forget painting out some of the old inscriptions from the previous owners. It had been, Rhinebeck, the campus there had been derelict for 10 years. It had previously been a Yiddish-speaking family camp called Camp Boybreak. I remember painting out the letter on a ladder on the first day before the Omega Summer began in, what was that, 1981, was it? Or 82? And then I came down to New York and cut a long story short, met Walter Beebe, who was somebody well-versed in the law. He was a partner in a law firm and going through his own inner changes and awakening and wanting to be involved with some other people and starting a real center. And so he and I met and we had a good balance of skills and abilities. Obviously, I was well versed in this whole world, the whole holistic, spiritual, ecological world. And
this is the 80s, right? Ralph, we're talking 1984, greed. the greed is good 80s, right? Of Wall Street and Ronald Reagan. And here you are
That's right.
opening up an open center in the midst of that, right?
That's right. And not just greed is good, but it was also the mayhem that people would remember of the early in fact, most of the 80s in New York and the 70s, you know, the crime, the violence, the chaos in general. It was, you know, not many people thought it would be feasible to actually start a holistic center in a place as dire as New York was in those days. And for our younger viewers, people wouldn't even remember what New York used to be like. But yes, it did seem, some people thought it was a quixotic venture. But we gave it a try, and yeah, and we actually launched it on a date I'll never forget. It was Friday the 13th, January, Friday the 13th, 1984. It certainly had an ominous ring about it. But that's when we did the first big open center event, the real launch of the open center. And yeah, we were greeted with a great deal of warmth and appreciation, and here we are 36 years later. So that's how it all started.
Did you feel in those first, say, that decade, that it was helping you realize what you felt in the Southwest desert, what you call your awakening, your opening? Were you feeling that you were bringing that to the center?
Yes, because I had gone personally from from being a sort of an angry teenage existentialist without any, I'd never really bought into religion. I had to have my own inner spiritual experiences, which began there in New Mexico and Arizona. And of course, then I had to enter into a whole many years of reading and exploration and practice and so on, to validate the holistic and spiritual and ecological worldview. So yes, I did. I feel that's exactly what the Open Center was there for. And the goal was from the very beginning to bring that kind of deeper worldview. But I still feel very strongly that holistic and ecological worldview is the worldview we need. When we come out of the COVID, that's where we need to go. We can't go back to that highway to hell that we were on with the global climate crisis, not to mention all the other issues that are going on, the encroachment upon the animal kingdom that leads to these viruses and so on. So yes, I feel the Open Center was from the very outset a vehicle for these ideas, practices, insights, and traditions to make their way into contemporary New York.
It would seem to me there was a real synergy in bringing different sort of almost what would be considered esoteric practices, even something like yoga for this country, together as a kind of synergy, saying they kind of support each other in another way of looking at what the world, the universe really is, a sense of greater unity, perhaps, than New York tends to emphasize with its competitive, greed is good kind of mentality.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I've always felt that with New York being a world city and us being the New York Open Center, that we had an obligation to really present the coherent, grounded spiritual paths from the whole city. Not just east-west, but north-south as well. And that we are looking at the emergence of a multicultural consciousness in the future that embraces all these different cultures and traditions and practices. So yes, the Open Center began to pioneer. Of course, we were doing a lot of Chinese medicine. We were doing Aikido. We were doing a lot of East-West stuff at the beginning, Japanese ikebana flower arranging, many Tibetan programs.
What you'd say is world culture from the beginning, right? It was not just about one's individual journey, right? It was connecting it all over the world, right?
Yeah, it was always about world culture for the Open Center. I think especially so among all the holistic centers that now exist worldwide. But yeah, we have a special focus on world culture. We live in a world city, and we rub shoulders normally before the pandemic with people from all over the world every day and from every culture. And I like that. For me, that's one of the best things about New York and America in general.
Wonderful. So 11 years later, though, you feel you need to do more in terms of education, and you start the Esoteric Quest. What was the impulse for that?
Well, I would say it came out from two primary sources. I had been reading a book called The Rosicrucian Enlightenment by a wonderful historian called Francis Yates. She was a reader in the history of the Renaissance at the University of Warburg Institute for many years. And I had become, since about 83, a few years earlier, sorry, this was 85. This would be for 10 years, actually, before we did the first Esoteric Quest in 95. I become a serious student of Rudolf Steiner's work, who I still find one of the most extraordinary spiritual philosophers of the 20th century. So I'd become deeply interested in the Western tradition. And also there was a feeling, look, within the holistic world, there's an enormous and quite understandable and legitimate focus on yoga, Buddhism, all in all its different varieties, shamanism, should we say. But the Western esoteric tradition had been really massively neglected. And of course, I can understand, I personally needed to turn away from the West in Europe for a long time and explore other cultures. When I eventually did go back to Europe after a 20-year gap, it was really through Russia and Eastern Europe. So I saw it with fresh eyes. But yes, I was feeling that the Western tradition, which for people with a European background is kind of our own indigenous tradition, that it was being ignored a bit, and we needed to bring it back. But also it was inspired by the fact that, I've been participating in these gatherings of holistic centers for 35 years. There is now an international network of holistic centers. And I had just gone to a centers gathering in Germany and met a friend there, somebody from the German Iceland, Zist. And we had agreed to just go to Czechoslovakia, which neither of us had ever been to before. It was right after the end of communism. It was a mysterious world. And we stumbled across one night this mysterious little town in the middle of the Samava Mountains. It had one of the most otherworldly auras I've ever encountered in my life. And we wound up staying in a 16th century hotel and looking out in the morning and seeing this mysterious tower rising up. And it turned out to be this place, Český Krumlov, the southern Bohemian Mecca of alchemists. Because it was behind the Iron Curtain, it was preserved perfectly. And there was nothing commercialized about it. And so I realized that book, The Rosicrucian Enlightenment, a lot of that book was set in this time period, the late 16th, early 17th century, which you could describe as the last time when spirituality and magic and science were still one. We stumbled into the 30 Years' War. By the time we emerged from that Europe did in 1648.
Right.
It was already the mechanistic and materialistic worldview. So this was a period of real magic and beauty.
You can go from John Dee to Francis Bacon and see that shift from a kind of magical science together. Then the magic goes out with Francis Bacon, and he suppresses the kind of esoteric knowledge that was, because they were fighting with the church.
Yeah, well, of course, all of the whole Rosicrucian Enlightenment took place against the background of the looming 30 Years' War and the showdown of Protestants and Catholics. But there was an effort there to look for a deeper esoteric spirituality that Catholics and Protestants had in common, because there were certainly Catholic hermetic writers, and but of course it ended tragically. And
Ralph, let me just stop you there. That's exactly right. What I'm saying is that it seems like you actually are back in your Southwest experience of a feeling of unity that you personally have, which was very threatening to the church, the Pope and the Catholic Church, because they wanted things filtered through priests. So much of the Hermetic tradition and the Rosicrucian symbol of a rose unfolding, is that unfolding, you find a direct connection to divinity, not filtered through the church. Is that right?
Yes. I mean, this has always been one of the things about the Gnostic path, and Gnosis hasn't been that rather than just dogma and faith, which is what many branches of the church advocate, Gnosis has always been about personal knowledge, inner knowledge.
And even evangelical in its time meant this, the good news was your direct connection to divinity, not this filtered kind of orthodoxy that we have in America with, it seems.
Yes, all of that, yes. So certainly in the esoteric traditions, the emphasis is on direct personal experience rather than just faith and dogma.
So very relevant to everybody, because I think that's saturating, it seems like today, with people doing mindfulness, people doing meditation. People weren't doing meditation on a mass level in 1984 when you started the Open Center. But now you did an Esoteric Quest, which is sort of about the history of people trying to get people to directly connect with their spirituality, it seems. And now it seemed to go very well with where people are today, with trying for a more direct, not mediated connection. With
I think there's a growing interest in the Western esoteric tradition, by all accounts. It's one of the rising fields in the humanities now.
Yes.
Because people are discovering there's this beautiful wisdom tradition that has been neglected, marginalized by science, marginalized by the church, and it's incredibly gorgeous. And of course, it goes all, let's just to fill people in a bit about what it is. What are we talking about here?
Yeah, you've been at this now 25 years, right?
Well, not just the quest, but the Western tradition itself.
Yes.
I mean, we go right back to some of its roots there. If most people are aware of Delphi, know thyself, the oracle at Delphi, and one of the ancient Greek mysteries. But the ancient Greek world was filled with mystery centers. We know about Eleusis. We did a whole esoteric quest on the island of Samothrace, where there was for 1,000 years one of the oldest mystery centers, the sanctuary of the great gods. Then it comes up through Alexandria. We did another esoteric quest there, co-sponsored with the Library of Alexandria, that has been rebuilt on the estimated same site as the original. So, we've come from way back from antiquity. We did a quest in Sicily that also looked at the whole Greek era as well as the Islamic era in Sicily. And who would have guessed that Sicily, along with the south of France, was the most tolerant place in Europe in the 12th century. So yeah, we've done all these quests going way back to antiquity, and we followed them up. We started off with the Renaissance, with 16th and early 17th century Bohemia, the Rosicrucian Enlightenment. We followed it up 2 years later with a conference in Prague, alchemy and the Hermetic tradition. We did a conference in Florence on the Italian Renaissance and the esoteric traditions, Kabbalah, Neoplatonism, Hermeticism. It's all of these things, that the sense that all of the esoteric traditions have that sense that we have an inner spark of the divine within each of us. There's an ember there that needs to be fanned into being a glowing, radiant core. And that essentially we are connecting the spiritual within each of us with the spiritual within the cosmos. So many of them refer to the microcosm and the macrocosm. The human being is the microcosm of a larger expanded, of the universe, or however you care, of the macrocosm. And so, yes, there are many themes that apply to a whole series of these esoteric paths.
Is there any specific quest or two that calls to mind where the setting and the teaching all came together in a really synergistic way that powerfully brought people together?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll never forget that first one in Český Krumlov, that we are celebrating. This virtual quest that we're about to do celebrates 25 years since that very first one in the southern Bohemian Mecca of Alchemists, Český Krumlov. That was the phenomenon. I mean, Gnosis magazine, or some of us may remember as the magazine of inner traditions. We co-sponsored the first one with them. They described it as an esoteric Woodstock.
Yeah.
You name it, everybody was there. From Robert Bly, who gave a beautiful poetry reading in the Renaissance Castle, to people like John Michel and so on, Jocelyn Godwin, Nicholas Goodrick Clark. I don't know if you're not familiar with some of these names, then I really do encourage you to go to esotericquest.org or to the Open Center, opencenter.org, and you can click on a link there to the virtual esoteric quest that will be happening on October 23rd through 27th. And the great thing about this is, as you can tell from what Jonathan and I are saying, that all these quests have been in amazing locations, highly evocative, whether it was Alexandria, Egypt, or Sicily, or the golden age of Andalusia in Granada. But this is going to be a virtual quest, obviously, for reasons of the pandemic. So so it's going to be an online thing that people all over the world can do. And I'm really hoping that our viewers here will be able to inform their friends, send it out to their network as well, if they themselves are interested. Let people know, because it's exciting that we can bring in people to this virtual quest from all over this world. But yes, go ahead.
There's a conviviality that you feel is essential to what the quests have been, the way it brings people together. So can you talk a little bit about that and how you feel that doing it this way, which has another dramatic way of bringing people together, how they'll be, that you're not going to, there's a central flavor of the quest that's going to be carried over into this.
get into the virtual version. Yes, that's right. And it's always been important to me that the quest had a strong element of conviviality. You can blame it on my Irish mother, but no, but of course, one of the comical aspects of it is that all those small towns in Bohemia, like Český Krumlov, how have they maintained unbroken the alchemical tradition for 400 years, despite the politics and the religion? Some people would say they've maintained it through the noble art of brewing. Every little town in Bohemia has a wonderful brewery. So starting it off in Český Krumlov, of course, and a lot of pubs there that actually look like old alchemist laboratories, though they used to be 25 years ago. So we've always had that convivial thing. The quest has always been about meeting people. You go to any event, because we're there for 5 days in Iceland or Sicily or wherever it is, of course, it's the meeting people. At these quests, you meet people who you have a heart and soul connection, people from around the world who are drawn to this particular path. So, and how are we going to replicate it? Well, we're going to replicate it online by having, of course, we'll have breakouts at the end of each session. We're going to have a happy hour at the end of the day's session. So the final session is at 5 o'clock New York time. It'll be over by 6:15. We'll have a 15-minute break, and then we'll have a 45-minute or an hour-long happy hour. And we can, if people want to be with the others, people they have known from prior quests, they want to have a convivial time with them, then we can do tailor-made breakouts. So yeah, and I would say in general, I always say there are 4 major alchemical ingredients to the success of the quest over these years. One, of course, is the quality of the learning, and we'll have no problem replicating that. We have wonderful speakers from all around, from Europe and America. The second, of course, is the conviviality that we've mentioned. The third is the arts. Now that's important, that we're not just listening to people talk. We're going to have some wonderful music in this virtual quest. There will be music from 12th century Languedoc in the south of France, the music of Occitania, the music of the troubadours and the Cathars. We'll have music from Iceland when we did our quest in Iceland about 4 years ago. I was amazed at the amount of music that was in that quest. The wonderful Icelandic musicians who drove hundreds of kilometers to this spot beneath an ancient sacred volcano, and they made music an absolutely integral part of that Icelandic quest. Iceland's small enough so that everybody from Bjork to classical musicians, they all seem to know each other. So having the arts there, having the music from Iceland, from Languedoc. We'll have a session on the music of Florence, the music of Renaissance Florence, Marsilio Ficino, who had the Platonic Academy in Florence, and he played the lyre. He was a healer as well as a philosopher, and the man who translated Plato and the Emerald, all the works of Hermes, all the Hermetic works, and so on, the Emerald Tablet, and so on.
John Dee learned so much from, yes. Yeah, the major.
All of that. So the only thing we'll really be missing of the 4 alchemical ingredients is the actual ambience of actually being in. We were going to go to Portugal this year, and for the 25th, and we had intended to do it primarily in a lovely town called Tomar, which was the stronghold of the Knights Templar after they were suppressed elsewhere. I didn't know they went on for 100 years under a different name in Portugal. And in fact, Henry the Navigator, who was the first real explorer of the great oceans, was the Grand Master of the successor to the Knights Templar. Anyway, we were going to do it there. And we've done it in many wonderful places, of course. So you can't replicate the actual ambience of being there. That is what has made the quest they're a full body experience. I always say they're a holistic approach to esotericism, because we want to be there, we want to feel it. There's the intellectual dimension, there's the convivial dimension, there's the open-heartedness, and there's never been anything, it's all very egalitarian, it's very friendly, the quest. It just has a good, open, warm vibe.
It seems like a wonderful way to organize a community. I mean, spirituality, it seems, is mostly taken up with Eastern, unless you're in the traditional church, Western church tradition. And this connects with, people doing yoga, people meditating can connect with what the Esoteric Quest teaches, the Hermetic tradition, the Rosicrucian tradition teaches. So it's almost like you can organize a whole community of people around this teaching, this understanding. What has been your experience with the community you've created?
Well, I think it's, it's just happened organically and naturally. I mean, we've got people who have been, we had people with us in Bulgaria last year who had been at the very first one in 1995. In fact, I should say, if you go to the Esoteric Quest website, then there's a wonderful essay by Jocelyn Godwin, who is one of our most distinguished writers and speakers on the whole theme. Jocelyn is truly an encyclopedic person. And Jocelyn was at the very first one, and he was at the last one that we did last summer in Plovdiv, Bulgaria, which was a fascinating glimpse into the whole Eastern European, Southeast European roots of this material. God, so many esoteric traditions have flowed through Bulgaria over the years. It was absolutely riveting. So, yeah, that's the way it is.
But I mean, this is different than a conference. This is different than attending a workshop in a way, right? And it's sort of different elements.
From a conference. Yeah, I should just point out that if you go to the website there, Jocelyn Godwin has a lovely article come from first to last quest, in which he really writes about what the quest has meant and what the quest is in its essence. But as you say, yes, it's not a conference in which, let's say you go to an academic conference, people are talking for 25 minutes, taking 5 minutes of questions. They're focusing on the most obscure work, sometimes the most obscure writer, because nobody else has done a PhD thesis on it. It's not about that. This is it's just a full, total experience. It is an experience of community. Certainly everybody bonds who's on the quest together. You know, we're imbibing this profound material. We're doing it in the place where it all happened. It's coming alive with us. Normally, we would be having a lot of dinners and meals together. You know, when you have a transformative experience, whether it's being in a Cathar castle from the 12th century, or it's being some, Norse sacred site that was sacred to Odin or one of the many other gods. Yeah, it's very different from just being there alone. I've done a lot of solo traveling. And it's very different from just going there to study it academically. It's a full spiritual experience.
It seems, Ralph, in a way, it's almost the opposite of being a tourist who just goes and takes a snapshot here or there. You've gone to these places and helped them even, haven't you, at times, find their own history, some of the locals that you go to.
Yes, I mean, Bohemia, this was the case right at the very beginning. The Czechs, or Czechoslovakia as it then was, they'd had 50 years or so of communism. They'd had the Nazis before that. Before that, they had 300 years of Habsburg oppression. After the 30 Years' War, the Battle of the White Mountain in 1620, where their own esoteric impulses were crushed really by conservative Catholic orthodoxy. So yes, we certainly help people there. And every time we go to a culture, we go with an attitude of deep respect and interest and curiosity. We're there to learn from them, which is why we have been greeted with such warmth wherever we have gone. Whether it was Andalusia, the south of Spain, which was Islamic for years, where we did one on the Golden Age there, where Sufis and Kabbalists and Christian philosophers all had an amazing level of coexistence there, conviviencia. Yes, so, and I think, that's often why we're thanked for people for helping them get back in touch. And we bring our own presenters, but we also like to have presenters from like in Bulgaria last year. The vast majority of our presenters were from that part of the world, because it's a profound but often neglected esoteric stream there.
That music of the Bulgarian women's choir, that was a big deal back, I don't know,
yes,
40 years ago. I don't know. That was like popular music way back.
Well, and of course, there's a whole tradition of seeresses, sibyls in the Balkans. In fact, some of them, one of them, the most famous of them, is said to have actually predicted that the US president would fall ill with a mysterious illness in 2020. Yuri Stoyanov, who's one of our speakers, just sent me a message about that. And it's a funny thing.
Actually, Ralph, Sylvia Brown, 1987, predicted in 3 predictions in 2020. One, that there will be a pandemic. That's not bad. The second was the president would have a heart attack.
Oh, well, I don't know Sylvia Brown.
That could be 2 out of 3. And the third is nuclear war with North Korea, which.
Oh, let's not go there. Yeah, let's not go there. So let's hope she was wrong. Anyway, but I mentioned this other woman, Vanga, I think was her name, something. But she was just part of the Balkan tradition of extraordinary seeresses. And of course, people don't realize even the Vikings themselves, thinking of Iceland, had their own tradition of the Vuelves or the Vulvas, the Viking seeresses, greatly prized for their ability to see the future.
Well, this is, of course, and we know from ancient Greece, you had to know, to tell you could predict the future, you had to say you could predict the past, something way in the past, some detail. And we know retrocognition and precognition now have a certain amount of.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, Jonathan, and because I know you yourself are the author of the whole book on William James, and you've been a long-time student of consciousness studies. Here's the book. You can put mine up.
How do you do this? Hold it up, yes.
Okay, here it is, The Illusion of Will, Self, and Time. It's on William James, written by Jonathan, who has worked with the Open Center for a long time. Yeah, what were we saying there?
Well, you were talking about seers and seers, and I will be giving a talk on
yes,
second sight as prime reality.
Right.
But I won't go into detail here, but just from what you were saying, it is true that divination runs through as a unifying theme through all of the esoteric history.
Well, it's part of it, yeah. Certainly, the oracles at Delphi, and there were many oracles in the ancient world, and the Roman sibyls, and so on.
But you said you were in Sicily, where Parmenides is right by there.
Yeah, that's right.
The philosopher Plato called, the only time he used the word bathos, deep, was for Parmenides. We called him Father Parmenides.
Yeah, well, of course, we got into Parmenides and Empedocles and all of that when we were in Sicily. But let's talk for a moment about what you're going to let the virtual. Let's devote the time we have left to talking about the virtual quest that is coming up between October 23rd and 28th.
Well, you first. Let's hear some of the other speakers. That's true. I can talk a little bit, but.
Well, let's talk about, let's say you, Jonathan Bricklin there, you're going to be giving one of the presentations at the Virtual Quest, and it really is connected to the one that you did when we did the quest in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland about 3 years ago.
That's true. I gave a talk on second sight when we did that, which is, well, several things, but basically it's about divination. It's about people seeing the future. That's how most people think of it. And what's interesting about Scotland is you have whole communities who have been witness to something. Like somebody would come into a church and predict an invasion, say, by the English army or something, which nobody was expecting on this island. And then it would happen in the way he described. And so that history would be passed down even through generations. I mean, Samuel Johnson, others had said that it seems to me, everybody in Scotland seems to believe in this. So with Scotland, you have a whole community carrying this idea that maybe something like divination is real.
Century, yeah. This is the 18th century Highlands and Islands, the time of Dr. Johnson and his tour. Yeah, that was, as you said, ground zero for the second sight.
It sure was. And then you have people like Robert Boyle, right, the great chemist. And we're starting up now with the Royal Science Academy and all of this. And it's often considered that they just said, no, this can't be. We have to start doing real science. So we're going to just denigrate all this the way it's denigrated today. Nobody, if you say precognition's real, go to Wikipedia, they'll say, oh no, we don't have real evidence for that. But what Boyle did was he didn't denigrate it. He in fact was looking for as much evidence as he could find it. The society itself maybe ignored it, but they weren't denigrating it. It's like, and when I wrote about William James, because he's another scientist who wanted to see what the facts were, not wherever it led, and as he said, parapsychology is a dog with so few friends at court, any stick is good enough to shake at it.
Yeah.
And, the court today is, say, Wikipedia. If you go on Wikipedia and look up anybody who has, anything to do with what we might call parapsychology, the skeptics will get, a huge fawning attention. And so little consideration for what the actual facts are around parapsychological.
Yes, well, as Johnson and Boswell said about their journeys through the Highlands and Islands of Scotland in the 18th century, nobody, not the most rigorous scientist, not the most devout divine, doubted the existence of the second sight. There was something up there in that part of the world that endured well.
That's right. And when they would travel to another part of the world, people who had a capacity to be a seer, they lost it. They have some stories of like that, which is interesting. So I agree with you. There's something in that environment. Look, you were in Iceland, which is another one of these northern environments that seems to be a home of, Iceland people really believe in dreams. They're really more than almost anybody in the world.
Right.
So,
anybody who has been to Iceland knows that it's the cordon bleu of silence, and you would better have a profound respect for the natural world around you up there. And of course, an extraordinary percentage of the sophisticated, well-educated Icelandic population believes in the probable existence of the little folk. Just like in the west of Ireland, farmers leave holy wells untouched. We have these remnants of these sacred traditions there.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit more about the virtual quest that is coming up. So once again,
tell some of the other speakers, Ralph. Who do you have lined up?
Well, one of the other speakers will be Christopher McIntosh, who I'll be interviewing in the near future, and I think it might be the 18th. But people who just go to the Esoteric website or are looking at the Open Center Facebook page will see when the interview with Christopher McIntosh is coming up. But Christopher is one of our most knowledgeable scholars, writers, speakers on the Western tradition. He's an expert on the Rosicrucian diaspora, what happened to it after the 30 Years' War. He has written on many of the great esoteric traditions. He has a book on Beyond the North Wind that grew out of his talk at Iceland. He's deeply immersed in the northern traditions as well. He's one of those people, Christopher's one of those people, with an Oxford PhD who is just encyclopedic. He's a very sweet person. And I'm looking forward to it. But he's going to be speaking about the art of memory. Some of our viewers may remember, I mentioned Frances Yates, the great historian who brought alive that period, the Rosicrucian Enlightenment. One of her famous books is called The Art of Memory. How did they do it in antiquity? And then it was revived in the Renaissance by people like Giordano Bruno. And they would build memory palaces. It was a whole visual approach. It even began to morph into a spiritual practice.
It was, in the ancient world, it was considered spiritual. The more you could remember, it was a divine capacity. It was much honored in the ancient world.
Yes, so Christopher McIntosh will be speaking about the art of memory. The wonderful Yuri Stoyanov, who wrote the book, initially published as The Hidden Tradition in Europe, otherwise known as the Other God. And that is all about the Manichaean tradition, which we have received a parody of. What we're told of as Manichaean it's a profound Gnostic tradition that at one point stretched all the way from the east of China to the southwest of France, across the whole Eurasian landmass. And the Cathars would have been, who some of our viewers will have heard of, these wonderful people and Gnostic Christians in the south of France in the 12th century were horribly killed as a result of a crusade declared by the church against other Christians.
Again, trying to have a direct experience of divinity, the Cathars, rather than mediated.
So Yuri Stoyanov, who is a brilliant person, is going to be bringing alive for us the Hermetic, the esoteric renaissances that Frances Yates discovered for us. We're going to have a day on the mysteries of the North. Valgadur Bjarnadottir will speak about the female aspect. We think of the Vikings, it's all about blood and thunder and, pillage.
Well, no, when I came to New York in 1979, the Met had the Viking art exhibit, and the jewelry and the intricacies. It was gorgeous and subtle and refined. And
yes, and they had a whole sophisticated spirituality, of course, and we've mentioned the Welves, their seeresses. And so Valgadur will be speaking about Freya, the goddess of love, the Vuelves, how they were the authors of this classic work that spoke of Ragnarok, the final climactic battle, the Voluspa, the final climactic battle between the gods and the giants. And so, of course, so much Norse mythology lives on in Hollywood these days. I love Thor Ragnarok. I thought it was great.
Yeah.
So we'll be addressing that. You'll be talking, and another lovely man called Alistair McIntosh, who's one of Scotland's leading spiritual ecologists. He was our guide really to the Outer Hebrides, the Isle of Lewis. We did that quest in a Scottish castle, actually, Lewes Castle. But it was not built in the Middle Ages, as most, or later, as most Scottish castles were. It was actually built by a Scottish opium dealer, I'm sorry to say. But it was wonderful. Alistair gave a profound apology for that on behalf of Scotland to a Chinese participant that we had in our quest there, Yang. So he'll be there speaking about the whole reclaiming Celtic spirituality. We'll be having a session in honor of the great scholar and writer of sacred architecture and sacred geometry and of Plato, Keith Critchlow, who died recently. He was a professor at the Royal College of Art in London, and there'll be a panel that afternoon with people who work closely with him. He's really one of the great teachers of our time. He just died a few months ago. And so all kinds of people will be speaking about that. Nicholas Cope, he spoke not only about the sacred architecture in Greek temples and Sufi mosques in Central Asia, in Chartres Cathedral, but also he wrote a book called Time Stands Still about the relationship between the old standing stones. Of course, the solstice means time stands, sun stands still. And all of those extraordinary sites in Scotland and England and, well, the whole British Isles really, and Brittany and further afield, that it clearly shows that there was something in that ancient culture that was much more sophisticated than we imagine, judging by their alignments, the use of the golden section, the way Platonic solids were found in the north of Scotland in times when that should have been inconceivable, and so on. So, and then of course we will, the last morning, we'll focus on Portugal, which is where we plan to do the next in-person quest whenever the virus permits. Ideally, it would be in this coming September, and we were going to do it in early September, exactly 25 years to the day since the first one. But we will see. I mean, frankly, nobody knows right now. So I think this virtual quest is going to be great. I mean, what thrills me about it is that we can bring in people from all over the world, all ages. All you need is an internet connection. And
that's right. I mean, it makes it even ability to bring more people together than you've ever had before from parts of the world. People who, older people I know, and who wouldn't travel as much. I mean, people,
you don't have to buy a plane ticket to Portugal or to Egypt or wherever it is.
And you can have an extra drink during the cocktail hour.
Yeah,
you don't have to drive home.
Bring your own drink, right? You don't. You can just have the cocktail of your choice during a happy hour. I mean, I'm sure a lot of us over the course of the pandemic have got to enjoy virtual cocktails and virtual happy hours. It's part of
I have to say, I really do see how positive that is. I mean, to make the best out of this is that you can gather potentially a very large community based around, something very deep inside all of us. It's a beautiful way to bring people together. People who don't go to church on a regular basis, perhaps, or synagogues on a regular basis, to be brought together contemplating and feeling the deepest aspirations within one, which is what the Esoteric Quest brings out. Yeah, it's a beautiful possibility, I think.
The Esoteric Quest is really about the golden thread of sacred wisdom that has gone through the West for millennia. Many times it's had to go underground through war, through oppression, through the Inquisition, through neglect.
And the neglect is what gives us the world we have now, which we're destroying.
And so now, when we do these quests, they're kind of a spiritual archaeology. The only good thing to come out of the Tibetan diaspora is that, of course, they brought all that living Buddhist wisdom all over the world, despite the horrible conditions in Tibet itself. And whereas this, we don't have the living teachers, of course, from 2,000 years ago of this tradition or more recently. but we can attune to it. And so it's a very beautiful feeling to read, to feel that you are finding another link in the golden chain of holy wisdom that has come down through all, think of, the wars, the struggles, the revolutions, the terrible, in many ways, history of Europe. And yet this golden thread of wisdom has continued. And it's been the privilege of the Open Center really to excavate it. And
there's a phrase often used about the disenchantment of the modern world. And I would say the Open Center and the Esoteric Quest seem to be almost some of the leading forces in Western culture to re-enchant the world.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. There was that wonderful book by Morris Berman, The Re-Enchantment of the World.
An Open Center teacher, yes.
Yes, he taught at the Open Center. And yes, we have fallen into an alienated, stressed world where people feel exhausted. They have to work like dogs.
And feel that this is the Western identity of dualism and materialism, and consciousness arises out of matter. And we have the hard problem. How can consciousness arise out of matter? Instead of, maybe there's more unity than we realize. Maybe the world is more made of light than we realize, as John Dee would, for instance, said.
Yes.
It seems to me that since you're beginning in the Southwest, that opening up experience of unity, you've just been trying to spread the word. The Esoteric Quest being your latest.
Oh boy, do I mean, the Open Center has been a wonderful vehicle to bring this into, certainly arguably the world's most influential city, and it's been very
for better or for worse, the most influential city.
Yeah, that's right, and but it's been very gratifying. The whatever it is, 400,000 people or so who have passed through the Open Center over the last 35, 36 years.
Wow.
And of course, over the years, even though I have a wide interest in the whole spectrum of holistic and ecological topics, I have a special love for this Western tradition because it's deeply nourishing to just, I love all the Tibetan stuff. I love the Zen. I love all those traditions. I feel very attuned to Latin American shamanism and so on. I totally honor all those paths. But there's something about feeling these holy, deep, esoteric wisdom streams as part of your own ethnic, almost your own cultural. Somebody was born in Britain and lived there till I was 21. It's in my being, but you don't have to be born there to feel it. So I feel like we're doing something. We're adding a piece of the jigsaw puzzle. We're putting together the whole spectrum of wonderful initiatives around consciousness, freedom, love, enlightenment that have permeated so much of the world and been lost in these centuries of materialism and, of course, the deranged consumerism that has gone on for the last 100 or more years, and that has brought us this sorry past with the global environment and with global warming. We can't continue on this path. So we have to shift towards an emphasis upon inner development rather than outer consumerism and materialism.
Yes. And we don't have to be spiritual vagabonds to the east to do it. It's right here in our own home,
it's
our own Western home.
It's everywhere. It's in the West, it's in the East. It's understandable that people look to the East because I was not moved by the Christian tradition that I was brought up in. I'd had enough of that by that time. I was 12 or 13. So I had to set out on my own search, which of course leaves me in a position now being highly sympathetic to the esoteric traditions in all the worlds.
Yes.
Christianity, Judaism, Islam, you name it.
And the Christian tradition, though, was also the Cathars and the Rosicrucians, but it was a different Christian tradition that needs to be brought out.
It was the Gnostic aspect, the living experience of the spirit, not just some received dogma.
Beautiful.
So all right, John.
I guess we're at our end here. Yes, Rob.
Do we have, let's see, any final thoughts here? Well, let me just say again to our viewers, the first virtual Esoteric Quest is coming up in 2.5 weeks' time. It begins at noon on the 23rd of October, and it goes through to Tuesday, the 27th. It's not nonstop. You can't, I learned some time ago, you can't do it, 6 hours, 7 hours a day of nonstop looking at a screen. There are gaps. There's a session at 10:30 in the morning. This is New York time. There's a session at 1. There's a session at 5. There are breakouts and happy hours. There's, as I was saying, there's music and performance. There'll be lots of chance to meet other people, which is always one of the great pleasures of the quest. And we have our different theme days. You know, we have the day celebrating the 25th. We have a day on the mysteries of the North. We have a day on the Renaissance and the Middle Ages. And then our final morning, we will look at Portugal, which is where we hope to do our next in-person quest. And we'll have a couple of wonderful people there speaking about the Knights Templar, the Sufis in Portugal, believe it or not, in the Andalusia period, and especially about saudade, which is this Portuguese word for the incredible melancholy, yearning soul experience that you hear in fado. Some of our viewers will know about fado, that incredible
soulful music, yes.
Portugal, that came from people being in the first voyages to Brazil or Indonesia, longing for their land, their lovers, their wives, their families. It's that incredible. So saudade, and also we'll be dealing with Fernando Pessoa, who was the most famous. Everywhere you go in Lisbon, you see images of Fernando Pessoa. He was this esoteric poet who died pretty young in the 1930s and had only published one book before his death. But then they found a trunk and it was filled with writing. And most people now consider him the greatest poet since Camões in Portugal, since Camões, who wrote the Lusiads, you know, the epic tales and poems of the original Portuguese explorations of the world, because of course the Portuguese were the first to really get out there and explore it with Prince Henry the Navigator and so on. So our last morning will be on Portugal, Portuguese esotericism, and, you know, and looking towards next, whenever we can do it in person, because this, you know, as I always say, the quest, it goes on. Oh, let me say one other thing too. If you go to their website, esotericquest.org, there's actually a library. There's a video library. You can click on that tab and that will take you through. We have, I think, 7 quests that were, 2 of them are on audio and the other 5 are on video. You can download a whole quest or you can download an individual talk. But if any of our viewers would like to get a sense of what it was like to be at some of these quests, then that's a really great way to do it, to go to the video library. So again, that's esotericquest.org. If you go to the Open Center, you'll find a link to this virtual quest. You could just put in the search engine virtual esoteric quest and it will come up. It gives people lots of registration options. Today, I should say that today, for anybody who is viewing this now, today is the last day of the early bird rate.
Discount,
yeah. So if you are, which is I think almost $100 less than the full rate. So I strongly recommend, if this interview has triggered your interest, please go and register today. It's also possible, and remember, the whole thing will be recorded, so that if you miss a session because you're in Australia or somewhere and it's the wrong time zone, everything is recorded. But of course, you can watch it live too. And there are all kinds of different registration options. There are scholarships for people. We understand that during this time of pandemic, a lot of people don't have work. And we want to, we know we're living in the real world here, so we're very aware of that. But I think it's going to be a beautiful experience, and I'm looking forward to it. So I want to encourage all our viewers to please check out the virtual esoteric quest. And I don't think you'll regret it. I've rarely, if ever, met anybody who came on one of our in-person quests who didn't have a profound and moving, and in many cases even transformative experience. So it's been a labor of love. It's a unique program. Nobody else in the world does anything like it. It's something the Open Center, I think, is very proud of, and we hope that as many of our viewers as possible will join us. So thank you, Jonathan. Thanks for doing this interview. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ralph. Looking forward.
All right, let's have a look at your book again. Let's put our 2 books up there.
I was gonna put your up there. Whoops! I'm not good at this here.
That's mine on the left there, The Jeweled Highway, On the Quest for a Life of Meaning. And then that's Jonathan's book there, The Illusion.
This is a real page turner. I have to put in my 2 cents on this one. It is an adventure story, and philosophy. Everything is in this. It could be made into a movie. I hope it will be. You really turn your page. You turn the pages, going, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? A very exciting read.
All right. That's the story of how I got to be involved in all of this. All right, well, I wish everybody a very good day. And here in New York, I think we've got a beautiful week of weather coming up, certainly gorgeous out there today. And I hope we'll see as many of you as possible at the virtual Esoteric Quest on the 23rd. So thanks, Jonathan, and all the very
Thanks,
best
Ralph.
viewers.
Take care.
Bye.